George on Sports with myself, your host, George. And today on the show, we have returning guest, Cameron Hogwood, Sky Sports journalist. How's that for week one, Cameron?
Couldn't have asked for much more, right? I think there was a stage on Sunday where you're kind of wondering, is this ever going to pick up? It was kind of, everyone was rusty and it looked like very much pre-season. And then suddenly all hell breaks loose in the last kind of few minutes. So, yeah, it was great to have it back and just felt like we had purpose again at a weekend.
It's weird because as I was watching it, I was sort of messaging a few people. I was like, well, football's back. But something just felt a bit weird. It sort of felt like the early games, if you exclude the Bills-Rams game, I know the Rams, they weren't their usual selves, but if we exclude that game for 1 second, the 6 o'clock games that started, it seemed as if everyone started off really slow and sluggish, like you say, like pre-season mode. And I just began to wonder to myself, is something going on here? Like, are we not ready? Has the hype of the AFC West taken over the league and people don't want to play anymore and they're just not coming out of their shells? And then, boom, before you know it, action started happening. So on that note, I'm going to jump straight into the Broncos-Seahawks game, which was the Monday night game for us over here in the UK. Now, the people who do the schedules in the NFL have a really important job, and credit to them because they know exactly what they're doing when they put these games as the first games of the season, where Russell Wilson, who was traded from the Seahawks to the Broncos, returns to play his old team, facing not only the Seahawks but the 12 men in the audience too. Now, if you're someone who likes to bet, more than likely you would have had the Broncos winning this game. However, that wasn't the case. So I just want to touch on your thoughts in that game. For me, one thing that I would say is I was very high on, I still am quite high on the Broncos, and I'll come to that shortly. I wasn't as high on the Seahawks. Naturally, they lose their star QB. They still have their star receivers in Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and they have Rashard Penny, who's the running back, who is quite underrated. Defensively, they're not great. So really, I was quite surprised by the efficiency of quarterback Geno Smith, who did win the QB battle. But what are your thoughts on that game, and did you see this coming?
I didn't. I think it was I think we all kind of were immediately saying this was Denver might steamroll the Seahawks here. There was that fear just because of everything that happened in the off-season, and this was the final piece, as you might say, for Denver. And I think what we saw in the end was the biggest, most glaring reminder to Nathaniel Hackett that he's got Russell Wilson in his team, and never again, I imagine, will we get to a fourth and kind of not too far for Russell Wilson, a fourth and doable that late in the game, and not put the ball in his hands. And the timeout, the wait for that timeout was just astonishing, and it was maybe summed up everything we saw from coaches at the weekend. There was a lot of sloppy decision making, a lot of kind of clock mismanagement, and I just thought that was, if it had to come for the Broncos and for Nathaniel Hackett in particular, that wake up call came at the right time, which is week one. But the only downside is it came at the old home of his quarterback, where he got booed the entire game and he walks off the field a defeated quarterback, having got that huge contract. But I was the same as you. I was surprised and impressed by a lot of what the Seahawks did. I think Charles Cross at left tackle was phenomenal.
Yeah.
He you didn't even hear him mention that's how good he was, really, because you didn't need to. Bradley Chubb barely got a sniff in the game, and that Broncos kind of second level defense at linebacker is a little bit kind of maybe their 1 weak spot where you're not quite sure if they've got that off-ball linebacker quite sorted yet. But Seahawks are impressive, and like you say, Rashard Penny looked sharp coming out of the backfield. I thought he looked really sharp. I liked a lot of what Geno Smith did. He shows a nice touch at times. I know you're not quite sure what you get with Geno Smith because he's never really held down a long-term starting job, but he did what he had to do, and I think Pete Carroll tried to take the pressure away from him and tried to introduce all these weapons that they've got and make use of what they've got, because it's not like they're short of talent on that offense. It's just that there's so many question marks about the best position on the team, and in the end, that would have done the Seahawks that was the best thing they could have hoped for, I think, a win like that.
Yeah. I think the other thing that strikes me is, okay, you've got Nathaniel Hackett, who couldn't be more happy to have someone like Russell Wilson, but Russell knows the 12th man, and he knows what it's like playing away from home. Russell wants to go fast. They wanted to go a fast-paced offense. They wanted high tempo, something that he hasn't really done before. You pair all of that with their history of, like you mentioned, bad time management and clock management and play calling, and they still with over a minute on the clock. I believe it was over a minute on the clock. Fourth and I don't remember whatever it was. You have a guy that you've paid, what, $250 million or something crazy to Russ Wilson, and you decide to remove him from the field in an attempt for a 64-yard field goal. It's not a 50 or a 40, a 64, which goes wide left. To me, it's just one of the... And he's actually come out, Nathaniel Hackett, and said, well, in hindsight, it was the wrong thing to do. Well, of course it was the wrong thing to do. You're giving Russell Wilson flashbacks to throwing the ball instead of handing it off to Marshall Lynch. It just doesn't make sense. But I agree with you. I don't really understand that call. The one thing I will say is that game sort of said to me, although the Broncos didn't win, I loved how they ran the ball, how they have spread the ball out. He made good use of his tight ends, and I think that what's good for them is when you have that 1-2 punch. I know they both had the goal line fumble, so credit to the Seahawks defense for that. But when you have the 1-2 punch in Javonte and Melvin Gordon, you can kind of do anything you want up front with your receivers and tight ends because you're always going to respect that run game. So from what I saw, the Broncos passed the eye test with flying colours, aside from the last minute decision at the end of the game. But it's kind of making me reevaluate my AFC West rankings, which we'll come to later on in the show. But I want to move on to another one of the games that happened this weekend. And that's the game that I like to call determines the real kings of the North, and that's the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. Now, all off season, I actually met Danielle Hunter and KJ Osborne when they came over to London for a tour of London, and I actually said to the guys, "Look, you got a new Kevin O'Connell, who's come from the Rams, winning mentality. You've declared the team as pass first. We're no longer a run team first team. Mike Zimmer, defensive-minded guy, is gone. He's not the head coach anymore. And all of a sudden, the Vikings look like a new, revived, and energetic team." Justin Jefferson is doing crazy things. I mean, he's already said that he's likely to become the MVP. He kind of looks like he's on his way if he can continue that. So for me, as a Colts fan, yes, I love everything that the Vikings are doing, and I've early declared them as the real kings of the NFC North because, in my opinion, and this is where some people give me stick, I don't think the Packers are... They're just not the same team. And I know, yes, they've lost Devontae and they've got Watson, who dropped that open would-be touchdown pass. He would have strided into the end zone. And yes, you still have your 1-2 combo and Aaron Jones and Dylan, but you can see the frustration in Aaron Rodgers' face. He doesn't like dropped passes. He doesn't like receivers that don't get their head around quick enough. And he just doesn't like all-round poor play. But when he took that contract, it essentially said, well, Devontae kind of has to leave because he needs to be paid, and it's not going to happen when you've been paid that kind of money. So from then on, in my mind, I don't think the Packers personally have enough to compete for that division title anymore. Yes, their defense is stout, but the Vikings kind of exposed a few holes there. And to make matters worse, you have Zadarius Smith, who's gone from the Packers to the Vikings, who's joined forces with Danielle Hunter and terrorized them all game long.
Yeah, I mean, where do you start on that game? There's so much. I think, first of all, the Packers aside, I think for the Vikings, you couldn't have had a more impressive introduction to Kevin O'Connell, I don't think. Just the way, when you look at the way you use, for instance, Justin Jefferson, you kind of had him in the backfield, he had him as kind of a split end, he had him kind of as a flanker, at every kind of position he filled. And he was just experimenting with the very best player on the field, and look what came out of it. It just made Kirk Cousins' life so much easier. When you've got Dalvin Cook back there as well, it forces teams to kind of fill the box at times. And then when you've got a deep threat like Justin Jefferson, you're having to drop into these two high safety shells as well. So you're really caught in a limbo. And when they play that well, with what Justin Jefferson can do, I mean, he destroyed J.R. Alexander.
Yeah.
And that's nothing on J.R. Alexander. He was just up against an absolute monster of a route runner. And yeah, it was just a joy to watch. I spoke to Viking safety Harrison Smith last week. I was like, what is that like to be up against in practice? And he was like, some guys you see, you either get the pop of speed or the pop of kind of route running and technician and being good with your hands. He's everything you could want. He is, and he just kind of couldn't speak highly enough of this guy. And
yeah.
Kirk Cousins as well. He was the big question coming in. And last year we saw them. It was really weird last year. They played a lot of empty formations, and Kirk Cousins was the best in the league out of empty, having the previous 2 years been the absolute worst in the league. So he's an absolute enigma, that guy on the centre. But he was a big question, played well. One of Kirk's best traits is he's accurate. He goes through his progressions fairly well. Maybe he's conservative at times. That's why he doesn't get a lot of picks. That's why he doesn't get intercepted too much. But it doesn't matter when you've got kind of this juggernaut of an offensive kind of armory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in contrast, the Packers, I think, had Christian Watson made that catch, I could have seen the game going slightly different, just because Aaron Rodgers, you could see, lost trust in him for a few minutes until they kind of got him back involved with an end around to let him get the ball in his hands, get a feel for it, and that was probably what he needed first of all, really. But I think if you watch the tape back a little bit, he does get open quite a lot, Christian Watson. There's a lot of positive signs there to be encouraged by. He's a flyer. He's got speed to burn. And I think once they start to integrate and get used to each other, I think that he's a real weapon for Aaron Rodgers. I think the bigger thing was he got more targets and more snaps than Romeo Dobbs, who we were raving about in the off-season. So it's kind of interesting to see where they are in terms of their value to this Packers offense at the moment. Be interesting to see how that changes. But Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, I think Aaron Rodgers said in the off-season they could get 50 catches each, and he's not joking. They could.
Yeah, he was... He was dinking and dumping, wasn't he? Those were the guys, the check downs. And we also have to mention, Lazard obviously wasn't there, who technically you would imagine would be Aaron's number one. But now that obviously you got Lazard, who should be coming back, and you have Watson, and then you add in the guys in the backfield. And you, obviously Tonyan as well, who I think is quite a great tight end. He was injured last season. So you would imagine that they're able to pull some wins together. Bearing in mind, last season, they also lost to the Saints in ugly fashion too, in the opening game of the season. So it might be a week one thing for them. Or it might just be the fact that, there isn't the same kind of harmony and chemistry just yet in the team.
Yeah, okay. I think a few injuries on the offensive line as well, that's probably not helped too much.
Yeah. One of the other games that I want to speak about is the Chiefs and Cardinals game. And I say that because I feel like I need to eat a little bit of humble pie. I was of the opinion before the Chiefs actually played that I couldn't really see them holding their ground in the AFC West, and I kind of placed them third in that division. And everyone was kind of like, what you doing? Mahomes is still Mahomes, although he doesn't have Tyreek Hill. And I watched that game. Number one, it was 44-21 to the Chiefs. It's a big blowout. But the Cardinals aren't in a great state. We all know that. They don't have many receivers. I know they went for Hollywood Brown, who did get his targets, but AJ Green is kind of, has been now and isn't the same kind of guy. We all know the deal with Hopkins, who's missing the first 6 games. Ertz is a bit banged up. Rondale Moore is apparently got quite a serious hamstring injury. So, they're kind of falling apart at the seams. In come the Chiefs, who, do you know what? I'm just going to say it. They looked really, really scary. Really scary. Just because you take out Tyreek Hill, and I'm one of those guys that kind of said, I don't really see it going the same way because he was a big part of their offense, same way Devontae Adams was to Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers. But what the Chiefs are able to do is, Mahomes he's releasing the ball a lot faster than he was last season. He's dinking and dunking, and he's taking the plays that are available, but he's spreading the ball out. And it's, whether it be to the running backs, Clyde had two touchdowns himself. Travis Kelce is obviously Travis Kelce. Juju looked really good as well, which is something that, a lot of people kind of assume that he would have fallen off, whether it be because of his TikTok dances or his actual shoulder injury, which was pretty bad. But they looked really good. And I have to say, I was really surprised because, at the end of the day, Andy Reid is a mastermind and Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen play the game. So my reaction is, again, I mentioned that AFC West is kind of, once again, my mind is really juggled. I'm not sure where I'm putting these teams. I have a fair idea. And yes, it is only week one, but at the end of the day, we can only go by what we see. So what's your immediate thoughts on that game?
My immediate thought was, thank God for Cliff Kingsbury that other teams played dreadful, because otherwise we'd be slating this team.
Yeah.
Because look, you mentioned the injuries, but even still, it's such a miscoached, disjointed offense and defense in particular, and Vance Joseph's being hung out to dry with that defense where he's trying his utmost to do something. It's just he's not getting anything back from his offense. And Rondale Moore's a huge miss, I think, for what they need to navigate towards doing, which was more pre-snap motion, which they use the least in the league. And when they use it, they're among the best in the league on offense, and it just makes no sense. And they continue to do that. And the biggest problem for the Cardinals last year was just no adaptation, no variation. And in contrast, it was kind of nice that we saw them play each other. The Chiefs last year, they were stuck in kind of a hole for a few weeks where they had this chunk play with Tyreek Hill where it's just this straight crossing route and teams just couldn't handle it. So what do? They drop 2 safeties high, and then it kind of cuts off that deep shot, and everything they want to do over the top, cuts it off, makes Mahomes have to think a bit more about where he's going to dink and dunk, like you say. And they kind of got over that bump, and here they are now ripping things to shreds again. And just we saw this off-season, they were using kind of Juju in the backfield. They used him out of the slot. They used him on the outside. They did the same with Sky Moore, using him in a similar way to how Debo was used, and how the Cardinals should be using Rondale Moore when he comes back.
Yeah.
And you can say about DeAndre Hopkins being gone, he's their best receiver, of course he is. But then rookie Trey McBride, tight end, why is he not up to speed yet?
Yeah.
Another team would have got him up to speed, and you kind of worry on that front. And he's an incredible player coming out of college, the best tight end coming out of college last year. And you're just a little bit worried about the environment in Arizona at the moment, because there's so much talent, individual talent, and you don't want to see it go to waste. You don't want to see Kyler go to waste, and the play calling is just not good enough at the moment. But in contrast, the Chiefs, they're just fun to watch. It's just fun football to watch. And there's that throw Mahomes made where Kelsey's coming on the crossing route.
Yeah.
And he's just, you can't even see him until he's thrown it. And Mahomes has seen him 5 seconds earlier. It's just like, wow.
Yeah.
His footwork looks like it's even better. The release, he looks like he had that toe turf injury last year, which I think he did say hindered him a little. Looks fully over that. Just looks like a monster out there. And it's even better. We get to see Mahomes and Herbert in week 2 on Thursday, which is pretty special. Yeah, very, very high on the Chiefs, and loved what they did.
Yeah, it's a shame because the Super Bowl is obviously in Arizona this year, and if the Cardinals were in a better place potentially and were a stronger team, we could have been looking at history in terms of the third team back-to-back to host and potentially win the Super Bowl in their backfield, with the Rams having done it last season and the Bucs the season before that. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. I'm sure we can say, well, who knows? You can never say never at any given Sunday, right? But yeah, the Cardinals, I mean, it was a tough day for them. I think it's still going to be quite tough for them moving on without the likes of DeAndre Hopkins and some playmakers like Rondale Moore. Obviously, you still got Connor in the backfield, but you need your complete offense to be able to do things, right? Yes, they put up 21 points, but conceding 44, like you say, is a big telltale. On that note, I want to move to the opening game of the season because I think it took a lot of people by surprise. Here we are, having waited 7 whatever months it is for the return of the NFL, and what better game than what some people are calling the Super Bowl preview of the Bills and the Rams. SoFi Stadium, I believe it was at SoFi Stadium, and the Bills end up walking away 31-10. Now, I have Josh Allen in fantasy in one of my leagues, and in my other leagues I have Stafford, Cooper Kupp. So I was, both happy and sad. But one of the things that shocked me was there's this thing about the hangover, right? The Super Bowl hangover, where it seems like those teams, they don't come out firing. There's a bit of a, still kind of hazy minds. Stafford doesn't seem 100% healthy. And when I say that, I mean, I'm talking to his elbow, his elbow, which was reported, he had rehab. And I think a couple of days before the game, he had his final shot. I think it's like a steroid shot or pain shot in his elbow to complete the procedure and the rehab process. But a couple of the throws that he made looked a bit gingered to me. We didn't see him utilize the likes of Allen Robinson, who they drafted from the Bears, someone that I really liked personally. Obviously, when you have someone like Cooper Kupp, that's your go-to guy because you know what he can do. But their run game as well was atrocious. Aside from some of the runs that Darrell Henderson made, which are okay, Cam Akers was nowhere to be seen. He was MIA. And again, you need that to function to be able to open up plays that Stafford and Kupp are great with, the play action, the rollout. And that just wasn't there. The Bills on the other side, who bring, and I find it so funny, you bring in Von Miller, who's just won the Super Bowl with your opposition right now, and you bring him into the Bills to face off against your ex-quarterback, and he ends up sacking them a couple of times. He shows no let up. The Bills as a team look like they were raring to go. It's as if they're still angry from that game against the Kansas City, where they lost the coin toss and things went downhill from there. They just came out and all cylinders firing. I mean, they just look amazing, whether it be Diggs, Isaiah McKenzie. I know he sort of didn't look after the ball and ended up causing an interception, but he ended up scoring. Tight end Dawson Knox, who I think goes under the radar quite a bit. Their defense as well. I mean, they and this is all without their standout cornerback, Tre'Davious White as well. He isn't even back yet. So for me, I mean, the Bills, they look like business as usual. I've said it from a while. They're one of my favorites to reach the Super Bowl and probably win the entire thing. I feel like they really deserve it. But the Bills are just really impressive. What's your take on that game?
Yeah, I think before we talk Rams, just the Bills. I said the same thing. I thought you were looking at a Super Bowl contender, if not favourite, from that performance. And the Rams were slow and kind of tentative in every single department of that game. So you don't know how much of a factor that played into it. But I think the Bills made them that way just because they were so on the ball. And Josh Allen just looked phenomenal. I know he had the 2 picks, but just everything about his game, the growth is just remarkable. I'm not sure there's anyone in the league who kind of compares to that growth in terms of the accuracy, where we don't even talk about those accuracy issues anymore that he came into the league with. Ken Dorsey taking over from Brian Daboll as offensive coordinator, he was just having a game out there, just lots of moving parts, kind of just nullifying this Rams defensive front with kind of this pre-snap motion, the way he uses Isaiah McKenzie in the backfield, kind of used Dawson Knox, you mentioned there, and fullback Reggie Gilliam. They were really important in terms of they used fake kind of outside zone lead runs with them two blocking. Sometimes it was counter reverse where they'd hand it off to a Diggs or a McKenzie in the backfield. Devin Singletary, we questioned the Bills' run game last year. Devin Singletary is very good. And that was why people were questioning, why are you using Josh Allen so much in the run if you've got this guy playing well? And this is why you use Josh Allen so well on the run, because he just bulldozes his way through people. And he never gets hurt because he's built. He's built the way Josh Allen is built. And the defense, Leslie Frazier did such a good job of kind of, the Rams tried to use these 5-man protections that worked so well for him in the past. And Von Miller just destroyed them with kind of these double ghost moves and looked like Von Miller of 10 years ago. And you're just looking around, like you mentioned, they missed Davis White, and Leslie Frazier used these conservative kind of secondary packages and coverages to protect his rookie, Khair Elam. And just there was nothing you could really point out where there was a weakness. And it's probably the most complete roster in the league. Probably one of the best coached. If a quarterback playing out of his mind, and you struggle to see who can beat them. Maybe other than Mahomes and the Chiefs, if they play like they play at the weekend.
And the Rams?
Yeah, the Rams. Like I say, I don't know. The Matthew Stafford situation is a little bit murky to me. He gave the most unconvincing answer when asked if his shoulder was all right. He was like, "Yeah, I can do everything." I was like, "Well, you can't, can you? You can't." But I think it must have been a sore sight to see Andrew Whitworth sitting there in the stand, kind of looking all bronzed and happily retired, and then watching Von Miller ruin your left tackle over and over and over again. That's an issue I think that probably needs to sort out. That'll probably come with time, because you lose kind of a stalwart like that. It's gonna take time, and when you're playing against one of the greatest pass rushers to ever play the game, that happens. And I just think Jalen Ramsey was a bit disappointing. He looked off the pace a lot. Diggs, I don't quite know what Jalen Ramsey was doing on that Diggs deep route where he kind of bites on the pump fake and kind of thinks the guy's coming into the flat and just abandons his coverage. I think he thought it was a different coverage, to be honest, but that's on him again. And were it not for Cooper Kupp, this game would have been over long before it was. And Cooper Kupp still looks sharp, so that's a positive for them. He still looks like normal Cooper Kupp.
I think the Rams they'll quickly bounce back because they kind of have to. The thing is, like, I find it, I said it before, I find it really strange. It's just the way the schedule's worked out. But when you have someone like the Bills and the Rams, any other game that they play against any other opposition, they're likely going 1-0, both of these teams. But now the Bills are 1-0 and the Rams are 0-1, and already they're behind. And, you know, with the competition of the teams this season, there is no room for error. It's the same way the AFC West, the Broncos are now 0-1. And they really shouldn't be. And the Raiders are also 0-1, and you have the Chargers who are 1-0, and the Chiefs are 1-0. And again, you mentioned they play on Thursday Night Football in a monumental game, which I can't wait to see. But I'm going to slide over to your team before we round things up and talk about the Titans and the Giants. I watched, there's a podcast called The Pivot, I don't know if you've heard of it, where you have guys like ex-players and Fred Taylor, the running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Ryan Clark, who's ESPN, played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Channing, who played for the Dolphins. And they had Saquon Barkley on their show, and pretty much all that Barkley had to say was, I'm coming back for everything. Everything that was taken away from me, the injuries. He was like, he was very quick to state how upset he was that people seem to write him off so quickly. The same people that built him up to be this guy are the same people that have kind of kicked the bucket on him. And he took it really personally. I don't know if you've seen it, but I recommend people to go and watch that show. And lo and behold, I tried to draft him in a couple of my fantasy leagues. I couldn't get him. And he came out for all the smoke. In particular, I want to talk about the 2-point conversion. Obviously, you've got a new head coach, Brian Debble from obviously the Bills. We know what he's done with the likes of Josh Allen, and Danny Dimes is no Josh Allen, so don't anyone go expecting that. But that call where the Giants score, and it's either we go for the field goal or we go for 2. And you make the call, you go for 2, and Barkley almost doesn't get it. But then you see that extra drive where he basically dives for the line, bowls the defender, and he essentially secures that win. And if I'm not incorrect, I think the Titans missed a last-minute field goal to give you guys a win. Now, I like what I see from you guys. I think you've got some weapons. I mean, Kadarius Toney, I don't know why he's not being used more, because he is a juke machine. He's an analog stick. He's a mini-me of Tyreek Hill, if you like. You've still got your guys on the outside. You've got Shepard. You've still got Golladay, who I still say to this day has robbed your team of finances because they've way overpaid him. But what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think you were right to point him out at the start. I think the overriding positive from that game was seeing the Giants' best athlete, who's Saquon Barkley, best player effectively, or should be the best player, back to kind of somewhere near to the player that we drafted originally. And it was just so nice to, first of all, from someone who likes watching good football, just to see a good player being able to play to his max again, not being hindered by injury, which has kind of been so cruel on him in the last few years. But I think the thing with Saquon was, we saw last year when he did come back, the confidence was just shot. If a hole appeared, he wouldn't see it.
Yeah.
If he did see it, he wouldn't punch it because he didn't have the confidence, he didn't have the cut, didn't have the agility or the speed that he used to have. And that was all back at the weekend. It was just so nice to see. And it got to a point where you're talking less about Daniel Jones, other than kind of the horrendous fourth quarter interception he threw in the end zone, targeting Saquon.
Yeah.
Were it not for that, you're not talking too much about him. And I think that's the way Brian Day would have liked to have started the season, where it's more of a case of it's not all on him, even though he'll have to go and win a game. This is Saquon's team as well, and he's such an important cog to it. It's a little bit like Christian McCaffrey in Carolina. That's how big a part he plays when he's at his best. And just, so nice to see that 60-yard run was phenomenal. And the Barkley of old. Other than that, Wandale Robinson was a really nice addition to this offense. And I think the packages we used with him was a lot of the reason why Kadarius Toney didn't play, even though I'm as mystified as anyone as to why he doesn't play more. But the kind of regime must have an idea of how they want to use him, and it's probably difficult to fit them two in the same packages, I imagine. But yeah, I'm sure he'll come back into it. Sterling Shepard is even though he doesn't light up the field every week, he's an important part of this team. It's nice to see him getting a touchdown. Yeah. I think this team looks better coached, better understanding of what they want to be and what they want to do. We saw there was just, under Jason Garrett, there's just no creativity, and at the weekend, kind of 38 out of 58 offensive snaps, we use pre-snap motion to kind of throw these defensive post-snap rotations that kind of throw Daniel Jones at times, and it just made everything look a little bit more cohesive. Kenny Golladay, I'm not quite sure where he fits in here. We'll see. But I think the secondary is young. That's an issue, and that might come back to hurt us. I mean, Xavier McKinney is a captain there for a reason, because he's a very good player. Possibly a first-round pick that fell into the second round. He's so important to that team now, but secondary is a little bit of an issue. But we've got to remember, we've still got Kayvon Thibodeau to come back. Kind of pass rusher for the next 10 years. So I'm excited to see him. I'd have been excited to see him up against that Titans team. But positives, I've probably been talking a lot different if they hadn't have missed that field goal. It's just...
At least you can. This is the reason why I've stayed away from the Colts game, and I refuse to do it. So just before we wrap up, a word on the Titans. So obviously you got Tannehill there, who no doubt is looking over his shoulder because Malik Willis is itching to take that spot. It wasn't awful, but I do think it's a matter of time, in my opinion, before Malik Willis at least gets some reps or does take over the reins. They've obviously lost AJ Brown. And I don't know, is it me, or do you think that Derrick Henry needs... He tends to be a slow burner anyway, and he is coming off the foot injury, which has potential to show its face once again, because that kind of injury can be quite frequent and often. What do you make of the Titans offense, and do you think they've got a shot at... Well, if you kind of have to include what we saw from the Colts and Houston game, but do you think they've still got a shot to take the AFC South crown?
I do, yeah. I think Mike Vrabel is that good a coach to turn this thing around. Should it go kind of pear-shaped? I'm not saying it has. I think they were just unlucky to miss that field goal at the weekend. I think they're still figuring this team out. They've lost AJ Brown, who who is such kind of he fits into a defensive team meeting where defenses have to plan for him. Now he's not there. There's not too much of a glaring threat on the outside that would deny teams the chance to fill the box, stop Derrick Henry, which we know is what they want to do, really. They want to run Derrick Henry as much as they can. I think Kyle Phillips looked a nice player. They're their third-round rookie. He's a really good route runner, probably a bit of a steal, kind of that late in the draft. He looked good at times. I enjoyed seeing him run routes and thought he'd be a nice addition to Ryan Tannehill's play action. But yeah, I'm not too worried about the Titans. I think it was just an overdue spot of luck for the Giants more than the Titans. And that Titans that defensive front is still good. They kind of have that four-man rush. They can kind of rely on that four-man rush still with kind of those stunts that they like to throw in, and I think they'll be fine. Just like I say, everyone was rusty and took a while for teams to get going at the weekend. I think that was the making of a preseason when no one played starters. Yeah.
And I guess you just have to look at how many missed field goals we had. The Colts have ended up cutting Rodrigo Blankenship because he basically cost us the game when he missed his field goal from a very, very, dare I say, easy scoring position. The Bengals game and Steelers game, so many missed kicks there in overtime, and then you look at the Titans who kind of blew it last minute. But we're going to wrap it up there. That brings us to the end of the show where we've discussed some of the week one games. It's been a crazy week one, and I don't know about you, but I kind of felt we were toward the end of the season with the way the games were going. Like, my heart rate was through the roof. I was on my knees at one point begging for the Colts to win, and we didn't. But we got a great Thursday night football game this week, where we've got the Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Chargers in a crazy game. Yes, the Chiefs are with the Chargers are without Keenan Allen. He has an injury, but regardless, when you have someone like Justin Herbert and Patrick Mahomes going head to head, it can only be fireworks. But until then, this has been George on Sports with an NFL Week 1 review. I'm George, your host, with Cameron Hogwood of Sky Sports, and we'll see you on the next episode.